In June of 1995, a book was published that had been written by Guy Davenport. It was called Seven Greeks, and it was about seven Greeks. It was a translation of some ancient Greek texts. And within those pages, Mr. Davenport wrote, "All over Greece, we find all endeavors taking the form of a contest, an agon." That Greek word agon is translated as a contest that is like a spectator sport, not unlike an Olympic championship. It's related to the word agony, as in the agony of defeat. The game that we call Agon today was invented in 1842 in Lincolnshire, England, by a fellow named Anthony Peacock Wilson. Now, he was a well-to-do banker and investor, what you might call a prominent intellectual at the time. Now, there is some speculation that he was inspired by hexagonal patterns in French tabletops. That sort of hexagonal grid of inlays was a popular motif at the time. Or maybe it was based on a game that he saw in France that was being played on a hexagonal grid. We really don't know. Now, Mr. Wilson did not capitalize on that game. He certainly didn't need the money. He mentioned the idea in some correspondence, and apparently he played it enough with his friends and family that there was some record in the history books of the game Agon, and the rules that we know today were pretty well codified. I found a reference to the game, in fact, a description and rules to the game in a book that was called Family Pastimes. It was published in 1852 by Robert Kemp Phillips. Here is a picture of page 26 from that book. Somewhere around 1870 or 72, the game company Jacques of London published a version of Agon with the subtitle The Queen's Guards. That became a popular title for the game in some of its incarnations. I couldn't find any more information about that particular publication, nor any drawings or advertising or art or of any kind. Jacques of London lost most of the records of the company in a bombing raid in 1942, so there's not much information to be had. And most of the books I have on my shelf acknowledge Agon. It seems to be really popular with those mainstream historic game books, and some of them go into quite a bit of detail on it. Occasionally it's claimed that it's the very first multiplayer game ever played on a hexagonal board. So let's just have a quick look at the rules of Agon and how to play it, and then we'll come back and talk a little more about the commercial incarnations of the game, Agon, the Queen's Guards. The board can be visualized as concentric rings of hexagons. Most Agon boards have each ring colored or shaded to make this easier to see. Each player gets one queen and 6 guards. These pieces begin the game set up as shown here. You can decide who goes first any way you like. The object of the game is to get your queen to the central hex, called the throne, and surround the queen by all 6 of her guards. Of course, your opponent is attempting to achieve the same objective. Players will take turns moving their pieces from hex to hex. Movement is generally 1 hex per turn into vacant hexes, either around the concentric ring of hexes or from one ring to the next inwards towards the center. A piece cannot move outwards away from the center unless it's been captured. Pieces are captured by the custodian or flanking method. That is, when an opponent's piece is surrounded on both sides in a straight line, like this, or this, or this. However, the captured piece is not removed from the game. The player whose piece is captured must use their next turn to move that piece elsewhere. If the captured piece is a queen, the piece can be moved to any vacant hex. If the captured piece is a guard, the piece is moved to any vacant hex on the outer ring. If a move results in capturing more than one piece in a single turn, like this, the captured pieces are moved one per turn. So in this case, the next 2 turns are spent moving these captured pieces. If one of them is the queen, that one must be moved first. If the capturing piece moves away before the captured pieces have been moved, the curse is broken and the forced move requirement is no longer in effect. An empty hex between 2 pieces belonging to the same player is off limits to their opponent. That is an omnidirectional rule, so this space and this space and this space are all off limits. For strict gamesters, these rules state that when a piece is touched, that's the piece that must be moved. There are no takebacks allowed. If you touch a piece and change your mind, you lose the turn. Now there's some early versions of the rules that have a different opening setup. The queens are generally set up on opposite sides of the board, but in some rules the players take turns placing their guards on the outer ring of hexes wherever they want before the game begins. Now in 1901, the famous American publisher of games, McLaughlin Brothers, came out with a version of Agon. They did away with the hexes. It was the same board configuration, essentially the same type of movement and relationship of the pieces, and that game was called Advance and Retreat. The packaging had these playful pictures of children playing soldier, and so it was obviously geared toward the younger set. And they also released a version of it with an American Indian theme. Now I looked around the internet to see if I could find a version of Agon to add to my collection. I don't have one. I could definitely make one. It looks like I'm going to have to because I couldn't find a thing. I'm sure there's versions of it available, but just about everything I could find is published in a book. Here's what it looks like, here's how to play it. But I don't find it on the store shelves anywhere. According to the Board Game Geek database, it's been published by dozens of different companies over the last century or so. The House of Marbles made a very nice looking set that obviously used marbles for the pieces on a hex board. There's a very interesting version called simply Guard that was published by Waddington's in 1971. It doesn't look anything like a strategy game to me, and it was published in that record album style that was kind of popular. Kensington and Skirid were both published that way, and it's apparently kind of a rarity, as you can imagine. Now there's some rules, variations, or clarifications maybe. In 1975, The Way to Play came out, and in those pages it says that when the queen is captured, the capturing player gets to decide where the queen goes. Makes sense to me. In Boderman's big book of games here, he specifies that a piece is only captured when it's surrounded on 2 sides in the same ring, so that if you're in other rings it doesn't qualify, I guess. That's the only place I've seen that, but it may be elsewhere. In a variant that is used by the Penthalon Mathematical Institute to play Agon, they specify that when a piece is captured, custodial on both sides, that it has to move to an adjacent hex in the next outer ring. And Agon is very popular with the mathematical crowd because of the different variations in the probabilities, I guess, on the board. And it's used for a lot of computer simulation exercises and that sort of thing. And it's real popular online. There are a lot of digital versions of Agon available to be played. You'll also find print and play versions of the game, usually published together with a whole lot of simple little strategy games for kids to learn, although it's a little more sophisticated than a lot of them. But if you've played Agon or the Queen's Guard or some variation thereof, please let me know in the comments section here so that we can share our experiences a little bit. But you know what I say every week, be sure to play every day. Hey, if you're a chess fan, there's a lot of variants of chess that are played on a hex board, some specifically on an Agon board. One of the coolest looking ones to me is called Kruzno. It's not really a chess game, but it uses chess pieces, and the names of the pieces are the same. You can get online and look for the Kruzno website if you're interested in that.